we are going to touch upon the ancient of ancient lands when all the land was one here within Earth. And in this remembering, before the continents broke apart, there was a root order of Breathkeepers. Now, the root order of Breathkeepers were a unified lineage that held the sacred technology of consciousness. We'll look at the time of the Great Dispersal, when the world shattered, when things broke apart, and then how this same lineage traversed and scattered across the different lands and became known by very different names. So we had the witches in the west, the monks in the east, shamans in the south, and then, of course, many others. Now, what we'll explore as well is how these aren't different traditions, and it's definitely not a different lineage, but more so speaking to the root. Humans who held the same function, but wore different cultural clothing, and then, of course, different cultural names. So this is in Reclamation. It is about the same practice of holding resonance between higher dimensional consciousness and the earth. And the bridge is our very bodies that were always the original temples. Now, I'll also reveal and weave into the humans that we know as Yeshua and Miriam the Magdala, who are held within the Christic lineage, were and are a part of the same sacred order of Breathkeepers and shepherds, serving a function that many of us bring into function today in form. However, these truths, as many of us well know and feel, they have been deliberately hidden to keep us separated. So we'll go into why factions, which we'll talk about, demonized the word witch, and how reclaiming this word is all about reclaiming all of our sacred lineages. So this is to walk the path of the great remembrance together. So make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications on, and let's dive in. So this is part 3 in the Reclamation of the Word Witch series, which each part traverses a different component of this much larger story that I'm weaving together in remembrance through dreams and visions and things that have been happening for many, many years, and now pulling it all together into a framework, which will go into a much bigger framework at a later time. More on that another day. But to begin, let's go into breath together. So if you can, close your eyes, take a moment, and let's root in. Imagine we are gathering once again around the eternal flames of the sacred fire, that primordial light that has burned since before the time split into fragments, since before the land broke into many parts, since before the one song became many languages. The warmth of this fire doesn't just touch your skin, but it ignites something ancient in your bones. It awakens the memory held in your cellular consciousness. It whispers the frequencies your soul has always known. And welcome everybody to Awakening Magic. You can open your eyes if you had them closed. I'm Natalie. I'm a vibrational medicine guide, and I'm a storyteller. Now, there are links below if you'd like to see the offerings that I bring forth, and also that my husband and I bring forth as well. As mentioned, I'm going to continue our walk on this reclamation of the word witch, and expand what I've been going over. So in part 1 of the series, we explored the true meaning of the word witch and the connection to bringing coherence and resonance, working with the field, the living geometry, which is held in waveforms, which is light, how light travels, and really going into this function about those who could attune to the living resonance of creation itself. So that was part 1. And in part 2, we went over what true spells were always supposed to be, which is a harmonic tongue that brought the field back into coherence, and weave that through as to how that became distorted. So we're going to walk through time itself again today to remember what happened when the world was one and what happened when it broke apart. So long before the continents and all the cultures developed their own languages, the continents were drifted, and long before even any of the words like witch or druid or monk or shaman and any of those names ever existed. What existed was one unified practice, one unified function, one unified wisdom of breath. And it was a sacred art. It is a sacred art because it has not disappeared. And it was shared by a lineage of frequency that understood how to hold the breath between what we have called heaven and earth. These were the original Breathkeepers. And what existed is a network of initiates who lived wherever the ley lines, which ley lines are actually dragon lines, where dragon breath currents rose strongly from the earth's crust. And the function and the focus of this sacred lineage was identical across the entire world, to align their breath with the earth's pulse, to keep the currents of the sky, to keep the currents of the soil in coherence, so balance, to remember that through sound and through stillness is where that remembering needs to be placed rather than in dogma or indoctrination through words or structures or organizations. Because this sacred lineage, this function, was not a religion, wasn't even a belief system. It was a living technology of consciousness and was the knowing that human beings, when properly attuned, can and do serve as resonance bridges between the cosmic, eternal living source, frequencies, and the earth's living body, which indeed is as alive as me talking right now. And this is what a witch truly was / is as well. This is what a druid truly was / is as well. This is what a monk truly was / is as well. They were the same function, just wearing these different cultural clothings and names. Now, when PanGaia, which is the word that I utilize to really demonstrate the oneness of the lands, you've heard it as PanGaia, and PanGaia is what I like to use because pan means all or entire, and Gaia means obviously the Greek word for the name, we've all heard this, and is an expression of the living planet, so PanGaia. Now, PanGaia means all earth or unified field of Gaia. And then what happened is there was PanGaia, and there was other variations and forms of different vibrations that we've heard as Earth, Terra, Gaia, which are really different vibrations of the same Earth, just in different resonance, different in varying dimensional consciousness. So there came a time when our world, when PanGaia was shattered apart. And it wasn't just physically, of course, yes, There was the supercontinent, if we will, of PanGaia, and it did break apart. The tectonic plates shifted, the lands drifted into what we now call all of these separate continents. But something really more profound broke at that same time as well. And I did some storytelling on this as well about separation versus unity and kind of that underlying feeling of what that was about. But what is really going on, what went on when this happened, is the coherent song lines, coherent breath lines that held the world in harmony, they fractured. Now, the harmonic weaving of consciousness that allowed instantaneous consciousness and that communication across the entire planet weakened. The crystalline architecture that once unified all the sacred sites into one living network fragmented at that time. And this is around that time, which I've also discussed in the storytelling, this is the Atlantean cataclysm that we've heard of, many of us very much remember, in our very cellular soil. The fragmentation of the Earth's torsion field is what happened. There was a breaking of the unified breath geometry, and this occurred after the Atlantean time frame when the veil of distortion just became too dense. This is when that veil descended down. Now, there was a time after that, which I have rememberings of, which I'll have to share some other time. But here's what the factions, which we will discuss, don't talk about in the His Story books, or we could say the power-hungry books, and what has been deliberately hidden from humanity. And a remembering that has weaved through my being in so many powerful dreams, even just in the past few months. This is exactly why this all needed to come out in this now time, with the lineage of Yeshua and the lineage of Miriam, the Magdala. So the Breathkeepers, that sacred lineage, the shepherds as well, did not disappear, but they had to disperse. And as the continents drifted apart, these sacred lineages went with them. So the same consciousness practice, the same resonance technology, the same function of holding breath and frequency, bringing coherence to the field, both in others, other humans, other animals, etc., and of course alongside with the earth, serving a function as bridging heaven to earth, so to speak. This meant they traveled to all these different lands. Each new land ended up the sacred lineage, the sacred practice, the one unified practices, this wisdom was adapted and ended up wearing the clothing of the local culture, whatever that was. The practice and the knowings then ended up having to speak the local language. The sacred lineages worked with the local plants, with the local stones, with the local star patterns, cosmology, but the core function remained the same. So let's walk together now across the broken apart version of our world, which of course we see today. And let's see how the same lineage expressed itself just in different lands. So in the West, there were the druids and the witches, for example, as the lands that would become Europe and the British Isles separated, which, by the way, was known in ancient times as the lands of Albion. I have a series that speaks on Albion here in this channel as well. The Breathkeepers, the shepherds, and the shepherds became to be known as druids. Again, the shepherds, and those who saw through the trees, who toned in the mists of Albion, aka Avalon, who sang the Ogham codes, which were vows to work with the earth's architecture, and who kept sacred groves alive with the frequency. And so the word druid, which we can go into many different variations, but it comes from Deru, Deru, meaning oak or tree, and Wid, meaning seer. So these are ancient roots, etymology-wise, of this word druid, which literally can be looked at as one who sees through the tree. Now this connects into the word that then became also witch, because it's this word, when you trace, which I did in the first part 1 actually, is connected into seeing, to see, seer. But what does that really mean? So it means one who can comprehend, to understand the trees as the trees are antennas. So ancient oaks are living record keepers of the forest itself as a consciousness network. Now, with alongside of them, or perhaps we should say as them, add what would later be called the witches. Now, here's the truth that makes, I feel, like everything come into place. So the term witch, when traced through the pre-distortion lineage, meant one who knows the wind, a whisperer, if we will, of the world soul. That is a breath keeper. Now, again, I go into more depth in part 1 about that word, so please go check that out if you can, if you haven't already. The witch lineage is and was a frequency lineage. So those who could feel the subtle currents, those who could read the energetic weather, those who could and knew how to speak to the wind, because they felt that the wind even carries consciousness, carries memory, carries the breath of the earth herself. So this is often why many of us feel the wind in our faces, and we can feel it in our bones. So when the religious and the power-hungry, controlling factions, to say it nicely, demonized witches, when they burned the wise women, when they destroyed the grove keepers, they weren't, of course, eliminating evil at all. They were systematically destroying the earth's frequency holders. Now, meanwhile, in the East, we have the monks and the Taoist adepts. And so in the Eastern lands, those that settled in what we now call Asia, the same breath keeper consciousness became the Taoist breath alchemists, who understood that qi, life force, energy, to say it very simply, and doesn't even begin to describe what qi actually means, as the living current of existence. And then also the Buddhist monks, who discovered that proper breath alignment could open dimensional gateways. The Tibetan lamas, who held the harmonic codes in their throat chakras using sacred sound to maintain the stability of consciousness itself. Of course, you've heard about throat singing and things of this nature. These are all, of course, connected. So then the masters of Qigong, Pranayama, the singers of mantras, all these things are practicing variations of the same ancient art. And when we look at even the word monk, this comes from monachos, meaning one who is alone. What does that really mean? What does it mean alone? It means one who has achieved a singular attunement to the one breath, one who has merged their individual consciousness with the universal breath. Different forest, different language, different practice, forms, different clothing, but the same function, to hold resonance between what we call heaven and earth, which are frequency gates. So then, if we traverse across the southern seas and beyond, the dispersal doesn't stop there. Across every land where the original breath keepers were scattered, the work continued. So we have in Polynesia, they became the breath navigators who could read the stars and currents, who sang the whale's song, who held the Huna wisdom. And then in the Aegean and the Anatolian regions, in those areas, that became known as the flame watchers, who understand breath fire, who kept the sites, the oracle sites, alive and breathing with that flame, the sacred flame that I talked about in the beginning. In Chaldea and Nubia, they became the star tonesmiths who encoded cosmic frequencies into sound. And then we traverse even into the Americas that we know today, and they became the wisdom keepers of indigenous traditions who never forgot that everything is alive, everything has spirit, everything breathes. Different names, different ceremonies, different languages, but the same sacred technology of consciousness. So the function here again is to state it very clearly, just so we don't get stuck in entitlement or hierarchy or roles. But really this is about function, serving a function. And also really seeing and peering into what this means, because we hear this anchoring of heaven into earth all the time. But what does that mean? Because heaven is not a place up in the sky. This is what we're always doing, but that's not what that works. What it is, it's not in the sky. It is a state of energy, like a high vibration. And of course, we look to the sky because the birds are in the sky. There feels like there's freedom there, but it's an energy, and it is a very high vibration. Now, Earth, of course, is not just dirt and rocks. And if you're watching this, you already know this, but just putting it out here. It's that energy, that heavenly energy slowed down into form, into matter. And the job and the function of the sacred lineage, no matter where, that many of us have encoded within us, it isn't to escape. It is not to float away. It is to be the connection between the two, literally through our bodies. Our bodies are the temples. It's being a tuning fork that helps that high energy in the physical world, the matter world, the form world, match up, link up, sync up. And so when you breathe with awareness, you help bring that higher energy into everyday life. So now this weaves into the Christic lineage. Let's bring in Yeshua and Miriam. Now, here's where, to me, it feels like it gets really profound and maybe also even more deliberately hidden. The beings, the humans that we know as Yeshua and Miriam, the ones who the religions distorted and turned into something as if they're separate from us, that they're something to worship rather than emulate, and Yeshua, of course, also even becoming a distorted image of a king. The real function, part of the sacred lineage, the Christic lineage, they were both Breathkeepers, the sacred lineage we've been talking about all in this video. So the same lineage, yes, and the lineage is absolutely alive today. We are waking up in this. We are serving in a function. Here for a reason, to come into form, to serve and carry the same functions, to bring that breath back. And so the Christic lineage isn't about a single person to worship. The Christic lineage is about a state of consciousness. And this happens from within ourselves. Now, this is where multidimensional wellness must come into play to ignite all of this, because our bodies must be clear, coherent, resonant tuning forks, aligned with the eternal living creator. Now, the state of consciousness, it's not about achieving some perfect alignment. We have to be perfect. That's not what that's about. We are human. We are in form. But it is about perfect alignment with the original creation frequencies. That is when we become a living conduit of the cosmic breath, the breath of the eternal, the breath of source. Now, if we break down the word Christ, many of us well know that it comes from Christos, means anointed, but anointed with what? What does that mean? Anointed with the sacred oils of consciousness. anointed with the harmonic frequencies of source, anointed inside of the body from the cells with coherent water, with the ability to hold and transmit the highest resonance. This happens through the sacred work of initiation, which is purification, which is all the work that I have held into a multidimensional wellness framework, which again, you can see more below. But this is what this is really about. And it's even about realizing there is the ability to hold that. All humans, okay? This is not some practice or something that is not attainable. And I've spoken about this in many videos, also talking about that oil of consciousness and where that comes from and what that really has looked like if you look in different cultures, and even through the crop circle videos that I've done and speaking to the comets. A lot of this has been unveiled through these ineffable, beautiful, magnificent beings that are coming in to speak these frequencies back into form with us. So that's all held in the Awakening Magick YouTube channel. Now, Yeshua was called a shepherd. And just like the druids, shepherds. And what is a shepherd but one who tends the flock, who guides the breath, who holds the harmonic field for others to find their way home? Yes, it is the same function the druids. Druids were called the shepherds of the lands. The same functions as the Taoist masters who shepherd the chi. The same function of those who are called witches, who shepherded the wind, the weather, the plants, and the living geometry in the field's living architecture to allow coherence to come in. So do you see it now, like I have remembered and have seen in so many visions and so many dreams? Do you see how they took a universal lineage and fractured it into these competing religions and belief systems even? How they made us think that we were different from each other when really we're all talking the same frequency. Now, they did this, these factions that I've spoken of, did this deliberately because a humanity that remembers, it is a unified lineage, a humanity that remembers we are all breathkeepers, cannot be controlled. So now we arrive in the heart of why we must reclaim the word witch once again. This is where we began really in part 1. So when the controlling powers like the Roman Empire, the Catholic Church, the patriarchal systems, which by the way is a system of control and separation, that's really what that means. Those factions needed to dominate humanity. That is the desire. That is the undertone of the desire. Now these factions had to destroy the Breathkeepers and the memory of them. But here's what's crucial to understand. They can't destroy all the lineages at once. Different lands, different names, different lenses, different levels of visibility. And so that is why they ended up picking the most accessible target, which were the witches. And that's because in Western Europe, the witch lineage was, again, more often, not always, again, no dogma here, but often the witch held in the female form. And this separation of control system, that they fear the feminine power that lives in the female form, which is also practiced in villages and in homes. They weren't protected. It's not like they were in the monasteries, high in the hills and high in the mountaintops. Although I really want to state here is that, for the record, those places weren't safe, really, either. The stories that I've read over the years, right? It's just... Also, the witches were very directly connected to land and to nature, which then these factions, of course, wanted to dominate. And the witches were about teaching people self-sufficiency and direct connection to eternal living source and eternal living earth, right? So that actually threatens religious control. That is why they systematically demonized the word witch in all the different locations, and of course, even in different regions with different names. and then began to associate the practices of breathkeeping to harmonics with some kind of quote-unquote evil, a darkness that was turned into something that meant something horrid, and then associated with some character they called the devil, which is a complete invention to control people through their biggest control factor that is still used today, and that is fear. Very simple. So they burned millions of women and men who held this knowledge. They destroyed the grimoires, the herb wisdom, the frequency I should say they tried to destroy. They didn't destroy. That's the thing, the frequency codes. And then over so many times, not anymore, they had made us afraid to claim our own lineage. Not anymore. Meanwhile, they tried to corrupt the other expressions of this lineage too. So this is where you began to see stories and all it's total nonsense, total lies. They claim the druids were savage human sacrificers. Lies. They colonized indigenous wisdom traditions and called them primitive. Lies. Advanced. They even tried to institutionalize the monastic traditions and have trapped those into hierarchies and dogmas and all of that. The core truth survived. It always survives. It was meant to survive because it's hidden in our DNA. It's encoded into the land, waiting for the time of the remembering. That time is now. This is why you're here. This is why this video and these videos have maybe found you. This is why something in your cells, if you feel it like I do, literally prickly chills all over the body, you know this truth, even if the mind doesn't really catch up, right? And I'm here to share this because I remember, and it's time for us to remember together. And there's a bigger reason. The planetary scalar harmonic lattice, which is basically a weaving scalar harmony of energies of consciousness, is reactivating as we feel, right? The ancient ley lines, dragon lines, are being breathed, beginning to sing again. And the breath of the true dragon force, which is an energy force, an energetic force, a light force, carrying waveform, carrying wisdom, is rising. And the crystalline grid and that architecture that had been fractured, it is being restored. And so when one octave of the Breathkeeper lineage reawakens, all the octaves respond because it's a frequency. And these frequencies are not disconnected. So when the Albion grid activates through someone working with the druidic frequencies, the Taoist nodes in the East respond. So then when, let's just say, someone remembers the witch lineage in their DNA, that actually sends ripples through the entire global consciousness network. Now, I've seen this happen, literally. You can measure scalar harmonic waveform in that weaving, that lattice. It is lattice, weaving, braiding is the vision. And I've seen that happen with content and with things that, practices that my husband and I are doing. It is real. And when the Christic codes activate in one heart, they activate in all hearts that are ready to receive them. So this is the cross braid. This is how this reunion happens. This is the planetary breath beginning to synchronize again. You are a part of this. So when I say that we are reclaiming the word witch, I'm not really talking about the word, but that's just because that's one expression of the function, one cultural expression of the function. I'm talking about reclaiming an entire lineage. And I'm talking about remembering that whether we were called witches in the Western lands, druids in the sacred ancient forest groves, monks in the mountain temples, shamans in the forest clearings, oracles or priestesses or priests at the sacred springs, or simply those who knew how to breathe with the earth. We were always the same function, always the same holders of the frequency, keepers of resonance. And that wisdom and that resonance and the coherence that that brings is how alignment with the all continues to ripple faster and faster. We were the bridges between heaven and earth, and the ones who remembered how to tone the world back into harmony. This is what the factions that we've discussed here in this video tried to destroy. Tried. Because they can't. You can't destroy eternal. Because a world full of sovereign breathkeepers, a world full of frequency holders who remember their power, cannot be controlled through fear at all, whatsoever, with anything. Can't do it, cannot be dominated by false hierarchies, cannot be kept small, and cannot be kept powerless. So let us remember, let us truly reclaim the truth in that. A witch is a breathkeeper, a druid is a breathkeeper, a monk is a breathkeeper, you are a breathkeeper. Different forests, different languages, different lands, but one song. And that song is truly beginning to reunify. The planetary breath is synchronizing. The harmonic weaving truly is reactivating. And every time one of us remembers, every time one of us reclaims our truest of true nature, every time one of us speaks these truths out loud, the entire field responds. So perhaps you could speak it with me now. You can just say the same words. I am a breath keeper. I am a holder of frequency. I am here to remember and restore the sacred breath of this world. Say that last one again. I am here to remember and restore the sacred breath of this world. Wow. Thank you for walking this journey with me today, traversing this story, traversing these truths, traversing these pure encoded rememberings. And if this resonates with you, please do share it with others who you feel might be ready to remember too. And subscribe if you can to continue this journey of awakening and reclamation. And come join us in our sacred celebrations and the things that we're doing here. And there's a bunch of links below to kind of capture the essence of how we are serving through our function in this sacred lineage also. And if you watched the 3-part series, please share feedback. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you again.